Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of Emerging Champion. We have a special guest today in Miss Jimlongo. Born and raised in Monti in the Eastern Cape, Miss Jimlongo recently completed a Masters of Arts in Political and International Studies with distinction from the university still known as Rhodes. Her thesis is titled The Release of the Widow and Life After Mourning, Xhosa Widows and Citizenship. She is the 2021 recipient of the South African Association of Political Studies, SAAPS, Best Masters Thesis Award. She is also the recipient of the 2018 SAAPS Best Honors Essay Award for an essay titled, When Women Have Reached the End of Their Politics, Nakedness and Resistance. That is 2 awards. Miss Jimlongo is a Friedrich, Ebert Stiftung Sport Hare Autumn School and African Political Theory Association, APTA, Summer School alumni. She is the 2019 Fellow of the African Women Development Fund Association Women Writers Workshop. Her research interests include African feminism, feminist economies, and citizenship studies. She is a feminist activist and aspiring writer who hopes to think through what it means to survive and thrive in the quest for joy and communal healing as a Black woman. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Jimlongo, for joining us today for this.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. That's such a I think, when you are tasked with the whole thing of, providing your bio, it's a thing of, am I, blowing my own horn? Should I be modest? And I thought, let me just give it to you straight. But yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for thinking of me to come on your channel.
All right. Thank you very much for agreeing to meet us as well. When I was looking at your bio, a lot of things were going through my mind, and I was looking for the right questions. Do we talk about essay writing? Do we just talk about feminism, African feminism, Black feminism? There was a lot, and I believe you're an inspiration to many young women and men of our generation. From the time you were at Rhodes University in the politics department at Rhodes University to the time you gave, a beautiful presentation, on a Friday in the politics department, to the time you gave us a basic preview of your honors paper when I was in third year at the time. So that was brilliant. So to start us off, Ms. Jimlongo, who is Miss Jimlongo? What inspires her and what motivates her?
Wow. Sure, what a question. I think that question is so loaded. It's a sort of an existential sort of situation. I think, I'm a small town girl. I'm a young Black woman from East London in the Eastern Cape, born and bred. I come from a long line of women who, are leaders within the family, women who nurture, who provide, who do all the things, without the sort of, guidance from men or sort of provision from men. I come from a long line where women are the providers within the family, So I think that's where my feminism comes from. I think that's where a lot of my activism comes from. A lot of what I write about, what I think about is because of the experiences that I've had with the women in my family. And I think that's why even with my master's thesis, a lot of it was inspired by my mom. In fact, all of it was inspired by my mom. She is the basis of it all. It was through me looking at her life, having grown up, with her as a single parent, and just sort of seeing the ways that she navigates her life. But I think who I am, I'd say I'm figuring it out. I think there's so much pressure to say I am this and I am that. But I think for me right now, I am a 24-year-old young Black woman who's trying to figure life out, trying to see what works, what doesn't. And just on a journey of self-discovery. I think especially for Black women, we don't really have that luxury, right? To say we're trying to figure it out. So I think when I think about moments of, capturing joy, moments of communal healing, I'm also thinking about that, as a Black woman, can I have the space to be free and to do whatever my heart desires, so that's what I'm about right now. I'm just doing things that make me happy, things that bring me joy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for this brilliant introduction. You mentioned a lot of things that I'm actually going to look at. You mentioned coming from a long line of Black women who are leaders in the family, who are providers. A couple of months ago, I had a conversation with one of my friends, and they were highlighting how Black women never get the praise for raising a generation, but we're giving it in the context of young Black men. And you were saying, the way he is today is because of his mother, even though the father is still there. But he was just saying Black women are responsible for raising, generations. We are all still figuring out, and it's a journey of self-discovery. Thank you so much. And my next question is about, you mentioned aspiring writer. When I think of writers, I think, for me personally, I recently got introduced to the work of Makhosazana Kaba. When I was reading a little bit of your honors essay, just a brief look at it, and I got this sense of powerful Black women, presenting their struggles, narrating a story. You mentioned you're an aspiring writer. Who is your inspiration as a writer? Do you have other writers you look up to?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think a lot of African feminist scholars definitely inspire me quite a lot. You would have noticed, even in my honors paper, I draw from a long line of feminist activism. I enjoy sort of that kind of thing of giving kudos where it is due, and understanding that our writing and our activism and even our thinking doesn't just, arrive out of nowhere, right? It comes from a long line of activism that was already being done by Black women. And so I think, while I don't think I have one particular sort of inspiration, but I think women such as, for example, Prof. Bola definitely inspires me quite a lot. Dr. Babalwa Makokwana, Dr. Sfokazi Magadla, who ended up, being my master's supervisor. I remember in my first year, just being lectured by her for the first time, and I was like, I was starstruck, and I was like, oh my God, right? And so I think definitely, if I were to go back and think about my love for politics, just in general, definitely Dr. Sfokazi Magadla is a huge part of that. And so to have worked with her as my co-supervisor in my MA thesis was huge for me. Dr. Shingirai Mtero, and the work that she does is really amazing to me. There are many, Dr. Asanda Benya. I admire a lot of Black women academics, because that is, where I would like to end up, hopefully in the future. And so for me to see them, that thing of representation has been very important. To see Black women doing it, it makes me also think, what, I can do it too, right? So yeah, that's definitely a lot of people, a lot, yeah.
Thank you. I think Dr. Sfokazi Magadla, is an inspiration to a lot of young people, and we are hoping to get her on one of our episodes. So look out for that. And we also have Dr. Mutero as well. So look out for that. You mentioned, as an aspiring writer, one thing that I know is that you want to talk about African feminism, but that's the message you want to bring across. But how do you want to bring it across? What exactly about African feminism do you want to bring out as an aspiring writer, or do you bring out as an aspiring writer?
So I think for me, my main thing has been to center the voices of Black women. I think that's what my feminism is about. That's what I aspire to do, even in writing, just generally. So to center the voices of Black women, especially Black women that have not had the opportunity to present their stories in the first place. So particularly women in township and rural areas, women who just have had their stories be relegated, to the periphery. I think those are the kinds of women that I really want to write about, that I want to talk about. Ordinary women like my mother, you understand? So women that are not seen to present their stories, or whose stories aren't in the mainstream, but they are there. Their activism has existed. They have done many things, and those are the kinds of women that I want to talk about, that I want to write about and theorize about, because their stories are valid and their experiences are valid. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Okay, so are you currently writing something?
Yo, what a question. So right now I am kind of taking a break from the academic space, but in my work, though, I do now work for a civil society organization. So there I do get to write a bit and collaborate on various projects. But right now, as far as academia is concerned, I am taking a bit of time off, just to let the brain cool off a bit. But hopefully in the future, I think in my spare time, I do enjoy, some creative writing, and I'm trying to hone that skill as well. So there is that. But as far as academic writing is concerned, I have definitely parked it a bit. And I hope to return to it soon. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I think we want to move on to a part that really helps young people as myself, young people who are in university, who are in high school, and this is the part on essay writing, because you're making strides as a writer, and winning a SAAPS award for best honors and best masters essay, that's like winning the Champions League, because
yeah,
because the standard is so high, there's no room for error, and being able to do it at such a large scale, I think we deserve to hear your story. I deserve to hear your story. Others deserve to hear your story, because I believe you're an inspiration to us all. And so what tips or what makes a good essay?
Sure. Number one, I think I'm honored to hear you say that. I mean, I think sometimes you write something and you don't really know how it will be received by people, and so to have it be received well is really something that you can never really prepare for or expect. So I'm really honored about that. But I think the tips that I kind of had, and I remember even as my time as a tutor for first years in the politics department at UCAM, I would always say, it's also difficult, especially as someone where, English isn't your first language, because English can definitely be a detriment, right? Because as much as we say, academic writing or whatever, but we walk into these spaces and already we are at war with trying to translate what we're thinking into the English language, right? So that, number one, is also a hindrance, right? And I would always say, just put things as basic as you can. When you are writing, don't try to use bombastic language. Don't try to come across as smart and say all of these big things. Just say things as they are, and most of the time you'll find that whoever is marking your work will appreciate that, will appreciate the fact that they are able to gauge that you actually have an understanding of what you're saying, that you're not just trying to use all of these big and fancy words that you think will be well received, right? And I also think another thing is just sort of having structure to your work. You do need to sit down with yourself and figure out what story you are trying to relay to the reader. And from that, figure out, okay, so what are the main points that I need to get across and how should I do that? So I think within a paper, within any kind of thing that you write, you definitely need to pay attention to structure quite a lot. So even in your introduction, relay briefly what it is that the reader must know by the time that they are done with your work, right? And then within your body, that's when you sort of make a case for all of the arguments that you've stipulated. And by the end of it all, you need to be able to arrive at a place where you have convinced the reader that what you are saying is in fact the real thing, you understand? And so confidence also in your writing is very important, because sometimes I think, imposter syndrome is such a real thing, whether it's in how we relate to lecturers in the lecture space, how we write, how we speak to other people. It's a big thing, right? It plays across all areas of our lives. And I think having been a tutor, I think that's what I saw, is that someone who's confident in their writing, you can actually tell. You can tell that from what you've been able to read, right? So be confident. If you are making a particular claim, make it, say it with your chest, say what you're trying to say, right? It makes the world of difference, because if you're not convinced, what makes you think that the marker will be convinced, right? So I think those are my main points. And even collaborating with other people, I think what helped me in my postgrad years especially was the kind of community we were able to create in the department. So we would just, go to social spaces and talk about your work. Go to the RAT, go to wherever, and just talk about your work, because there you'll then be able to harness a collaborative space, a collaborative environment, and then that will help in your writing as well, because you're not just using, what you think is right, but you've also been able to draw from other perspectives as well. So I think, yeah, those are my tips off the top of my head, really. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think this would definitely be helpful to students, especially when they're writing their tutorials before exams, because you mentioned things like confidence, and we're going to touch on this later on, because, to be able to win the 2 awards that you have, you need to be confident for probably your honors, masters. That's like 3 years of confidence, at a higher level. And we're going to come. Okay, I'm going to come to this now. And you mentioned imposter syndrome. That is something that a lot of people suffer from, especially I've seen, especially now in postgrad level, when it comes to writing proposals. A lot of people are facing imposter syndrome, and because we're going to have another episode where we're just going to discuss on proposal writing and what it entails, because imposter syndrome is such a real thing. So my next question is, when it comes to confidence, how have you been? Is Miss Jimlongo always confident? Does she lose confidence sometimes?
Yeah.
How have you been able to do it consistently at such a high level over a period of time?
Number one, I am not always confident. I am even still figuring it out, like I said before, I do think, though, that there's a level of confidence that comes with reading, right? And sort of reading across the spectrum, reading within your field, because you also can't write without having read, right? And I think that's where the confidence comes from. If you know what you're talking about, it'll come across in your writing. If you have a good grasp of the literature, then that's what will make you confident. Because obviously, if you don't really know what it is exactly that you're contributing to, then you can't do it well, right? And I think part of academic writing, and I remember this stuck with me. I'm not sure which lecturer actually sort of reminded me of this, but it really stuck with me in that with academic writing, it's sort of a conversation, right? So what you're doing when you're reading the literature is you're listening in on the conversation that has already happened before you came along, right? You're listening, people are talking, and you're grasping here and there that, oh, this is what this conversation is about. You can't now, as someone outside, come in and just say something without having listened to the conversation, right? Because then you'll be saying something completely off, something different, something that's not even aligned to the conversation that's being had. So part of listening to the conversation is reading, number one, right? And then that's how you're able to contribute effectively and productively to the literature. So listening to the conversation is reading. There's no two ways about it. You cannot, and I think that's the thing that really sort of hinders a lot of people, is that, I mean, to read it's a task, right? We can be lazy sometimes, but there's no other way about it. In order for you to write or to contribute meaningfully to literature, you need to read. It's a hassle for me too sometimes, right? And I won't claim to be this, all-knowing, perfect, scholar or whatever. It's a thing of, you just need to sit down and read, and that's where I think that level of confidence and that ability to write clearly will come from. And also editing, rereading your own work multiple times, sharing it with others to give you a different perspective. That's how you sort of revise your work. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that brilliant insight.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about coming into the university space and English is not your first language. I think that applies to a lot of people who come into this university space. But I don't know, I'm looking for the right way to phrase this. When did you know that you were a gifted writer? When did you realize that your essays were that good? And how did you perfect the skill? How did you perfect the skill of essay writing?
Number one, I would still say that I am aspiring. I don't think I've arrived at any particular, place. Yeah, not by a long shot, and I think, it's just one of those things. I've had a lot of people who have spoken, life into my writing, who have affirmed me in many ways. And so I think that's also important. Within your community, that you have people who continue to affirm you, affirm your work, and just steer you in a positive direction. So I've been lucky enough to have those kinds of people in my life who just are constantly breathing life into my work. But I think it's also a thing of sort of, I don't know, understanding that you haven't arrived and that you still, because writing is a work in progress. There's no work that is ever fully finished, right? So even, for example, years from now, I might look back. There are certain things that I've written. I remember writing about this on Twitter, actually. And I had said that, I was looking through old essays of mine in my undergrad. And I was like, I disagree with myself completely in these essays, and you never know. There might come a time when years from now, I look back at my thesis or other things that I've written, and I just simply no longer, share the same sentiments. I no longer think the same way. We are constantly evolving as people, and that's why I think you can never actually reach a particular point where you think you are, a great writer or a great thinker. I think our thinking is constantly evolving, and that's the beauty of life, right? So yeah, I think my thing has always been to meet myself with grace, to meet myself with kindness, to understand that nothing I ever do is a finished product. It's all a work in progress. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the church says amen.
Yeah.
You talk about evolving, and to have such thinking ability and being able to understand that people evolve over time, your ideas will keep on evolving. That's brilliant. On Sunday, one pastor called Pastor Matebo mentioned that crisis is produced champions. Crisis is producing champions. and this is the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been, others have been affected, others have lost their jobs, but for others, they've found a way to work and persevere in that form of crisis. So my question is, how were you able to do it all during COVID, especially last year, writing a master's thesis, and that master's thesis, which became the best master's thesis for SAAPS? How were you able to do it all during COVID, especially last year when COVID was at its peak?
Yeah. I remember a friend of mine was also asking me this question, in that how did I sort of, manage to submit? And there were so many challenges. It was a challenging time. It was difficult, and other people in the department who were working on their MAs at the time or their PhDs will tell you the exact same thing. It was very challenging. Number one, doing an MA is a process, right? So you commit to certain timelines internally, with yourself. So I know for myself, I had this vision that, by December, I will be submitting my thesis, and that just didn't work out. And I thought, by a particular time, I will be undergoing my fieldwork, conducting my interviews, but that just didn't work out. So there were so many things that just didn't go the way that I had envisioned them to go. And that's also another thing of meeting yourself with grace and kindness and understanding that sometimes things just won't work out, and you just have to look at them and go, okay, how do I adjust, right? So COVID, I think for me, was a time of adjustment, but it was also a time of writing under incredibly, difficult conditions. I won't say, for me, COVID wasn't some, testimony of triumph. I think, not by a long shot. For me, it was difficult. At times you are faced with, incredible amounts of loss and grief while you are trying to write. And it was hard. It wasn't, I won't even lie and say I triumphed and I persevered and all of these amazing testimonial things. No, it was in fact the worst. But sometimes you just need to get it done. I had no choice. It's also a practical thing of, logistically speaking, funding becomes a problem, and all of those other things, which are problems across the board for postgraduates, right? So there are conditions that postgrad students had to work under in the time of COVID that I do think, and I do hope that the university space could have supported us better. But, things just worked out the way that they did. I was delayed in a lot of things, even in my field work. I was delayed, submission process delayed. But it did all work out. It happened. I'm thankful so much to my supervisors and even the women that I interviewed, who were so gracious, so kind, to let me speak to them, let me go into their homes and so forth. Obviously, bearing COVID protocols in mind. It was a difficult, I won't even, I know it was difficult. If I could have, perhaps I could have, paused the MA a bit, came back at a different time even, but it's just a matter of, for me, logistically speaking, that just wasn't an option, which is why I say that I do hope that in future, if things like these do, unprecedented times such as COVID do happen, that institutions will be able to support their students better, like logistically speaking, financially speaking, because I know a lot of people who had to extend their MAs and struggled with that because they no longer had funding. So that's a big issue, I guess I was just lucky to submit in time. Pushing my body, pushing my mental health to those limits, and it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't be writing under such conditions, but that's just how it was. But I'm thankful I had support. The department really supported me. My friends, my family really supported me quite a lot. So I'm thankful for that. Yeah.
And I know you've answered this part of the question when you're giving your answer, but I think I just want to hear probably your view, because I think the most important thing that you've talked about is also support. You need support around you. You need to discuss, let's say, writing with your friends, what with your friends and colleagues. I know you've answered this, but did you feel like giving up, and what kept you pushing?
Oh yeah, I definitely did. Yeah, I did. I think I just knew though that giving up wasn't really an option for me. So I think there are also, certain privileges that I just didn't have. I mean, I didn't have the privilege of giving up and coming back at a later stage, and that just speaks to my positionality. Um, I did. I think a lot of people struggled, with trying to submit during the time of COVID. You think about giving up quite a lot, but I also think for me, thinking about my why. I remember a friend of mine, I would be going through the absolute most, and talking to my friends and be like, I just don't want to do this anymore, But they would remind me, they would be like, remember your why. Why did you start this project? Why did you do this? And for me, my why was like, I needed to get this story off my chest. I knew that I needed to write the story. I needed to do it for my family, for my mom, especially for the women that I've into. Like, I knew that I couldn't just have gathered their stories only to leave them by the wayside. I knew that it was important to tell this story. It was important to get this work out there. So I did want to give up, almost definitely, without a doubt.
Yes.
But I think I needed to remember, why did I start? Also, the practicalities of sort of, letting the project go like that. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And for the final section of this beautiful conversation, I just, because I think I'll be doing people a disservice, because we talk about these beautiful Black African women that you interviewed, your mother, and your master's thesis. And I think people would want to kind of hear an insight of or about what you wrote on. But because the thing is, I think your writing, especially like the honors paper and the master's thesis paper, that's that should be a conversation on its own. But I just want to bring it for a little bit so that people can have some insight, and then maybe in future episodes we can bring you back, and I would have done some research and read up on your master's thesis and maybe present counter arguments or something. So yeah, I think, but for now, you mentioned, okay, there's something in your bio that's, I think that we just need clarification on, and and it's because it stands out, because it says she's a feminist and aspiring writer who hopes to think through what it means to survive and thrive in the quest for joy and communal healing as a Black woman. Can you please just explain on that? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, I always say, even if, like, I think a lot of my work, when I think about my research interests, when I think about what I would like to do in the future, or how I envision my sort of career going, at its core, it is about speaking to the everyday experiences of Black women. That was even what my master's thesis really at its core was about. It was about, moving away from these spectacular moments of violence that we locate Xhosa widows within, right? And just sort of speaking to their normal everyday experiences. How do these women relate to one another? Their women-centered networks. How do they forge sustainable livelihoods for themselves? How do they, create moments of joy and just, living, right? That's my That's my main sort of thing. I want to speak to the everyday. And so I think when I say I hope to think through how to survive and thrive in the quest for joy and communal healing, it's exactly that. In that, those experiences are important, so we should also consider the moments of spectacular violence and so forth. They have been written about, but I just think that there's also an opportunity to consider how Black women come to create spaces for themselves, how they come to create moments of joy, how they come to cultivate healing. I think those are also equally important. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned these women who invited you into their houses, during COVID times. Obviously, COVID restrictions were observed, but what did you find out about them, especially when it comes to Xhosa widowhood and citizenship? What did you find out about them?
Mm-hmm. So I found, number one, that even in the way that we think about citizenship, it's usually been from a very statist conceptualization, a very nation state rhetoric, and so my whole vantage point of it was, through a feminist conceptualization of citizenship, which looks at things such as belonging, how women make sense of their lives, how they define their womanhood, and so forth. And so when I met the woman, I even mentioned this in my thesis, is that we really related to one another as them being my mothers as well. So I also found homes while undertaking that research. So it's very personal work to me, very sentimental work to me. And so what I found really was that at their core, usually what happens, even in the literature on widowhood, is that, women are sort of ostracized, and they do experience all of these sort of negative and violent acts, whether it's from the state and how the state interacts with them, with the legalities of it all, so with wills, inheritances, and so forth, or with how family members will interact with them, where there are cultural stigmas involved, and people will be labeled or accused of having been responsible for their husband's demise. And so there's that as well. But what I discovered was that how women then sort of make sense of their lives after the mourning period, really quite a lot of it draws from, the experiences with the church, the experiences with other women. I refer to it as women-centered networks, where these women in their communities have been able to, forge relationships with one another, and that's how they then make sense of their lives. They rely quite a lot on motherhood and how they view themselves as mothers in terms of protecting their sort of inheritance and their dignity of their children, of their homesteads, and so forth. And so I realized that quite a lot of it is dependent on motherhood. Quite a lot of it is dependent on spirituality, their reliance on God, on the church, on hymns, to create moments of joy and healing for themselves after the mourning period. Their reliance on farming, stockfiles, burial societies, and so forth to create sustainable livelihoods for themselves. And so it's quite a lot. I mean, it's without me sort of bringing in all of my findings, there was quite a lot that I found that was quite interesting and quite different to how we originally have conceptualized widowhood in the discipline of political studies.
I don't know. It's like, you just sold your thesis to me. I don't know. I was touched. I don't know. It just touched me because it kind of reminded me of my grandmother as well. Like how she had to rely, obviously after my grandfather passed away, how she had to rely on the church, other women, hymns, farming, because she was into farming as well, but obviously on a smaller scale. I was moved as you were speaking, and I honestly think you've sold your thesis to other people, and you've perfectly explained it, that even someone who doesn't really understand about politics, feminism, they have an understanding of what you're talking about. And thank you for that. I'm actually now looking forward to reading it, and
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And lastly, in your research interests, you mentioned about feminist economies. What does that entail? Is that the Stokvels? What does that entail?
So my sort of conceptualization of feminist economies is to look at, how women forge sustainable livelihoods for themselves. So that includes women-centered networks, their church societies, stokvels, including, grocery stokvels, monetary stokvels, and so forth. And so it sort of goes according to how women are able to come together and create livelihoods for themselves and provide for their families. And that's something that isn't usually accounted for in sort of mainstream statist kind of economics, where usually women who are involved in informal work aren't usually included in that narrative. And so my sort of thing was to say that actually what happens is much of women's contribution to the economy comes from those networks, right? So many women who are able to send their children to school, who are able to sort of provide for their children's initiation ceremonies, for example, within the Xhosa culture, are able to do that through things like stokvels. How we are able to, around December time, many families will relate to this, how their mothers are able to pool together groceries around December. That's through those stokvels. So how women are actually able to contribute to the economy is through those networks. So my sort of argument is to say that we need to recognize these as valuable contributions to the economy itself, and not as a sort of peripheral thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to read up on your thesis, and hopefully we'll have a further conversation on this. So to conclude, so what does the future hold for Ms. Jimlongo? What are your future aspirations?
Sure. Well, I think the future for me holds, just thinking through a lot of the things that I was thinking about in my thesis, thinking about the whole issue of feminist economies, paid, unpaid labor within, society and in South Africa, thinking about citizenship studies, African feminism. But I think a lot of it just includes me sort of understanding what I want from life, where I see my life. I think right now I'm at a place where I'm just figuring it out, just doing whatever works. But it includes me, I think, getting a better understanding of what it is that I want to do. So hopefully, there will be further studies in the future, getting into academia a bit more, but also working a lot more in civil society, working in communities, doing some of the underground work a bit more. Hopefully traveling as well. I'd like to, see the world, see what it has in store for me. Yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm just at a space where I want to use my 20s to just get to know myself more and dabble in this, dabble in that, and see what sticks. I think that's kind of where I am. Yeah, I'm not looking to define myself too much. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for making time, and we'll look forward to having you again. Please, and if you want to follow Ms. Jimlongo, we'll put her Instagram and Twitter handle in the description below. Thank you.